Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's go ahead and wrap up this week's TTT episodes with Silmarillion Saturday. Now, Saturdays are our chance to revisit the history and legends of the Elder Days, whether from the Silmarillion, unfinished tales, or more. Last week, we read about Tuor on his last steps to the hidden kingdom of Gondolin. We got him past the fifth gate, but he's still got a ways to go, and once again, I'll be reading from this version of Unfinished Tales. So they came to the Golden Gate, the last of the ancient gates of Turgon that were wrought before the Nirnaeth, and it was much like the Gate of Silver, save that the wall was built of yellow marble, and the globes and parapet were of red gold. And there were 6 globes, and in the midst, upon a golden pyramid, was set an image of Laurelin, the tree of the sun, with flowers wrought of topaz in long clusters upon chains of gold. And the gate itself was adorned with discs of gold, many rayed in likenesses of the sun, set amid devices of garnet and topaz and yellow diamonds. In the court beyond were arrayed 300 archers with longbows, and their mail was gilded, and tall golden plumes rose from their helmets, and their great round shields were red as flame. Now, sunlight fell upon the further road, for the walls of the hills were low on either side, and green, but for the snows upon their tops. And Elemekil hastened forward, for the way was short to the 7th gate, named the Great, the Gate of Steel that Maeglin wrought after the return from the Nirnaeth, across the wide entrance to the Orfalk Echor. No wall stood there, but on either hand were 2 round towers of great height, many windowed, tapering in 7 stories to a turret of bright steel. And between the towers there stood a mighty fence of steel that rusted not, but glittered cold and white. 7 great pillars of steel there were, tall with the height and girth of strong young trees, but ending in a bitter spike that rose to the sharpness of a needle. And between the pillars were 7 crossbars of steel, and in each space 7 times 7 rods of steel upright, with heads like the broad blades of spears. But in the center, above the midmost pillar and the greatest, was raised a mighty image of the king helm of Turgon, the crown of the hidden kingdom, set about with diamonds. No gate or door could Tuor see in this mighty hedge of steel, but as he drew near through the spaces between its bars, there came, as it seemed to him, a dazzling light, and he shaded his eyes and stood still in dread and wonder. But Elemekil went forward, and no gate opened to his touch, but he struck upon a bar, and the fence rang like a harp of many strings, giving forth clear notes in harmony that ran from tower to tower. Straightway there issued riders from the towers, but before those of the north tower came one upon a white horse, and he dismounted and strode towards them. And high and noble as was Elemekil, greater and more lordly was Ecthelion, lord of the fountains, at that time warden of the great gate. All in silver was he clad, and upon his shining helm there was set a spike of steel pointed with a diamond. And as his esquire took his shield, it shimmered as if it were bedewed with drops of rain that were indeed 1,000 studs of crystal. Elemekil saluted him and said, "Here have I brought Voronwe Aranwian, returning from Balar, and here is the stranger that he has led hither, who demands to see the king." Then Ecthelion turned to Tuor, but he drew his cloak about him and stood silent, facing him. And it seemed to Voronwe that a mist mantled Tuor, and his stature was increased, so that the peak of his high hood overtopped the helm of the elf lord, as it were the crest of a gray sea wave riding to the land. But Ecthelion bent his bright glance upon Tuor, and after a silence he spoke gravely, saying, "You have come to the last gate. Know then that no stranger who passes it shall ever go out again, save by the door of death. Speak not ill boding. If the messenger of the Lord of Waters go by that door, then all those who dwell here will follow him. Lord of the Fountains, hinder not the messenger of the Lord of Waters." Then Voronwe and all those who stood near looked again in wonder at Tuor, marveling at his words and voice. And to Voronwe it seemed as if he heard a great voice, but as of one who called from afar off. But to Tuor it seemed that he listened to himself speaking, as if another spoke with his mouth. For a while, Ecthelion stood silent, looking at Tuor, and slowly awe filled his face, as if in the gray shadow of Tuor's cloak he saw visions from far away. Then he bowed and went to the fence and laid hands upon it, and gates opened inward on either side of the pillar of the crown. Then Tuor passed through, and coming to a high sword that looked out over the valley beyond, he beheld a vision of Gondolin amid the white snow. And so entranced was he that for long he could look at nothing else, for he saw before him at last the vision of his desire out of dreams of longing. Thus he stood and spoke no word. Silent upon either hand stood a host of the army of Gondolin. All of the 7 kinds of the 7 gates were there represented, but their captains and chieftains were upon horses, white and gray. Then, even as they gazed on Tuor in wonder, his cloak fell down, and he stood there before them in the mighty livery of Nevrast. And many were there who had seen Turgon himself set these things upon the wall behind the high seat of Vinyamar. Then Ecthelion said at last, "Now no further proof is needed, and even the name he claims as son of Huor matters less than this clear truth, that he comes from Ulmo himself." Now, that is the end of that amazing narrative in that chapter of Unfinished Tales. But there is a footnote in which Christopher explains that while the story ends here, there remain only some hasty jottings that outline the rest of the tale. So Tuor asks about the name of the city, because until now it's been referred to just as the Hidden Kingdom or the Hidden City. We get the blowing of the trumpets, and that made the version of the tale in the Silmarillion. But then Christopher says that a description of Gondolin was to follow, of the stairs up to its high platform and its great gate, of malorns, birches, and evergreen trees, of the place of the fountain, the king's tower on a pillared arcade, the king's house, and the banner of Fingolfin. Turgon was described as the tallest of all the children of the world save Thingol. Ulmo's cloak was going to disappear when Tuor spoke the message. He would later learn why there was no queen for Turgon. His wife Elenwe died during the crossing of the Helcaraxe. Malorns! Look, fantastic stuff. These gates, such vivid descriptions. I would love to see faithful representations of these on screen at some point. The visuals would be amazing. The rights to Unfinished Tales in the Silmarillion have never been sold, so it might be a while, it might be never. And then there's that little chat with Ecthelion. Now, a reminder, this is the same Ecthelion who will later slay Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs. Tuor isn't having it. Or is it Ulmo? Now, how often do we see things like this? To Tuor, it seemed that he listened to himself speaking as if another spoke with his mouth. This happens a lot. It happens with Frodo and Sam. It happens with Beren in front of Thingol. I know it happens at least a half a dozen other times. I can't remember all of them, but it always seems to be some sort of Valar intervention. And I think this is not just Tuor delivering Ulmo's message like a courier. This is Ulmo himself speaking through Tuor. And next time, we'll chat about the words that Ulmo has to say to Turgon and see just what's done or not done about those words. For now, though, that is it for today's Silmarillion Saturday. Come back for more of the Elder Days every Saturday as we open up the pages of Middle-earth history. And if there is a First or Second Age story that you want to hear me read and discuss, please let me know by emailing barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Now, if these few minutes leave you wanting more Tolkien content, please be sure to check out the Prancing Pony podcast, where we've spent 7 years so far walking through the books, including the first 50 or so episodes just on the Silmarillion. Now, speaking of the Prancing Pony podcast, be sure to check out the new episode that drops tomorrow. Sarah and I wrap up our time in the Houses of Healing, and it is a fantastic episode. It ends up being over 2 hours long. We talk so much. Now, finally, join me again next Monday as we start another week of today's Tolkien Times with Mailbag Monday. Please like and subscribe on YouTube, follow or subscribe on your podcast apps to make sure each episode gets downloaded to your device. Follow @Tolkien Times on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.